I was talking to my son Colin and my daughter-in-law Ashling about the teas of spring. They had temperatures of 74 degrees last week, followed by a snow shower and a high of 19 degrees yesterday in Concord, Mass, where they live. Colin likened the coming of spring to the kingdom of God. Already, and not yet. Today's readings from the prophet Ezekiel and the Gospel of John, in addition to having in common the theme of healing waters, wholeness, and restoration, also have that quality of the already and not yetness of God's reign. An angel showed Ezekiel a vision of the restoration of the temple from which the living water flows. Ezekiel wades in the water until it becomes a river so deep he must swim across. And that river brings abundant life, fish, and fruit trees of every kind, whose leaves do not fade nor fruit fail, and are watered by the flow from the sanctuary. Ezekiel wrote this at a time when the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed, and many of the Hebrew people were exiled in Babylonia and elsewhere. It was a time of desolation. John's Gospel narrates the healing of an ill man beside a pool of water called Bethesda, which means house of mercy or flowing water. Some translations, like the King James and those that are based on King James, include an explanatory line, which was probably a later addition to the text, about how an angel goes down to the pool and troubles the water or stirs the water, and the first person into the pool after that is healed. This pool, tantalizingly close to the temple, is surrounded by a number of ill, blind, lame, and paralyzed people, none of whom are welcome to the Jewish feast that's being celebrated at the temple. A man beside this pool has what sounds like an unrelentingly bleak existence. He has been ill for 38 years and seems to be completely alone. He has no one to put him in the water when it's stirred, and so he can never be the first one in. Jesus sees the ailing man. He knows he's been ill for a very long time. He asks if the man would like to be well, and he heals him. And there is so much that is refreshing packed in here about the living water, the flow of the Spirit, God's restoration, our healing. But I can't help thinking of the crowd of people surrounding the pool of Bethesda. Jesus has healed one of them. But what about all the others who can never seem to be the first person to wade into the troubled water and be healed? Already and not yet. Many of you probably watched Henry Louis Gates' PBS special. It was called The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. It's a great series, just a 2-part series. I highly recommend it. Introducing enslaved people to the Christian gospel did not have the effect the slave owners intended. And thank God for that. Many enslaved people instead met a God in the business of healing souls and bodies. A vibrant and shared spirituality offered inspiration and the actual route to seeking freedom and liberation. The spiritual wade in the water would be sung especially enthusiastically in the plantation fields when someone was getting ready to run. The coded message: don't stay on the road to the Ohio River, but step into the creeks, the rivers, where the movement of the water and those angels on the Underground Railroad will confuse the dogs trying to follow your scent, and they won't be able to follow. Just like Pharaoh's horses and chariots couldn't follow the Israelites as Moses led them to freedom across the parted sea. Wade in the water. God's going to trouble the waters. And many did escape. Most did not. And as many in our country are coming to know even more acutely during this time of reckoning, the bonds of oppression were only partially loosened for African Americans, even after legal emancipation. Already and not yet. Healthcare workers have done heroic work treating patients of COVID-19 this past year. Many were healed of the disease. Some were not. COVID-19 vaccines are now being offered to help bring an end to this pandemic. Many will be spared infection. Others are still left waiting. We live in the tension between the already and the not yet in so many ways. And I think it is here we meet Jesus. It is in the gap between the promises Ezekiel gushes about and the reality in which we live. In this gap is where the kingdom comes, where the living water flows and makes the salty water fresh. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus says. And how does Jesus love? Well, in this story, he saw the ill man. He knew how long he had been sick. He entered into conversation with him. He saw to it that the man rose, took up his mat, and walked proudly to the temple where he belonged. There are so many more of us. When we see each other, when we know each other, when we engage with one another, when we help each other up, that's when the living water gets stirred up. That's how we keep moving toward the promised land. That's how we participate in filling in the gap between the already and not yet. So please, if you have a few more minutes, enjoy this rendition of Wade in the Water, recorded during a sound check for a Sweet Honey in the Rock performance. It's linked here in my printed text, as well as below this video in the Holy Trinity communication.